another edition of Just a Chat with Pastor Bruce Engelman. We hope you're enjoying the show. Before we get started with our guest this evening or this afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in, and this show is watched around the world by different missionaries and people overseas. Before we get to our guest, I do want to ask the American people, especially the Christians in America, to pray for Judge Neil Gorsuch, who is up before the bench. You know, it amazes me, and I do agree with Lindsey Graham on this one point, the senator from South Carolina. The liberals always get their man in there, or woman, but they never let the Republicans or constitutionalists or conservatives get theirs in, at least without a big fight. And so we need to pray for a man who's the most qualified and eminent jurist to be up as a nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court, maybe since Oliver Wendell Holmes, certainly since his mentor, Antonin Scalia. And the media, the liberals, the press are trying to just vilify him, make up all kinds of lies. So I'm asking Christians, not only in America, but around the world, to pray for the confirmation hearings of Judge Neil Gorsuch. Amen. It will affect every Christian, even the liberal Christians, for many, many generations to come. Our guest today is a very special friend, and I've gotten to know this fellow the last year or so, and we've really bonded here. He recently did a service in our church with his precious family, and that is Steve Brady of the Brady Family. They've been traveling musically for many years with their ministry of outreach and music. They play gospel music, all different types and genres, and do it very well with good music standards. They're soul winners. Their theology is great. They don't hate the King James Bible like most Baptists today. I will repeat, like most Baptists today, they love the King James Bible.
Yes, sir.
And Steve, it's an honor to have you on our show, Just to Chat with Bruce Engelman today.
It's an honor to be here, sir. Thank you.
Today we just did a funeral for the last surviving member of the very legendary gospel group, one of the first with the Statesmen and the Stamps and the Blackwood Brothers all the way back to the late 40s, early 50s. Kind of got their start here in Fort Worth, and the Carters were from Fort Worth. And that last surviving member was Clyde Carter, and today Steve and I officiated his widow's funeral. 98 and a half, wasn't that amazing?
What an honor. What an honor, brother. That was awesome.
Especially for somebody like you who's had a career in gospel music. That had to mean even a little more to you than it did me, and we were friends with her. But
you know, growing up, my dad's, one of his favorite groups was the Chuck Wagon Gang. Okay. And then later on, after we'd listened and I'd been introduced to that music, my dad started liking Jimmy Davis, the ex-governor of Louisiana.
Yes.
And little did we know that Jimmy Davis would later on marry Ann Carter Davis. And so it was it was awesome today. It was great to be there, and I want to say you did a great job on the funeral. It was awesome.
Thank you. Praise the Lord.
The family was so pleased to have you do the funeral, and that was so interesting to be able to talk to those folks, and they gave me a little history on the Chuck Wagon Gang, and so it was great.
And were they down to earth?
Oh, I mean, very much so.
Some people, you and I wouldn't, but some people would call them celebrities. But they were just so friendly and down to earth.
Just humble and just sweet and kind, and it was our honor. It was a privilege.
It was great, and thank you for helping out.
Yes,
your family did a great job. We are going to have your wife on for part 2, and we're going to talk about the Brady family and their ministry of music, and they have all kinds of connections in gospel music to the Booth Brothers, to the Jim Brady Trio, to the old Brady Bunch, to the Brady Bunch on TV. They were a little more spiritual than this Brady Bunch, but we're not going to go there. No, I'm kidding about the Brady Bunch on TV, but the old Brady Bunch gospel family. But today we're going to have a special show to honor your brother. One of my best friends, and I'm not dropping a name, we were best friends, and in fact I did a banquet in his honor with the Sports Media Association of Cleveland, Ohio, and Bruce Drennan, and we threw a banquet for Nestor Shylack. My friend Nestor, we were from Pennsylvania. In fact, there's a street in Oliphant, PA, named after Nestor Shylack Boulevard, who is in the Hall of Fame, and the men in blue don't get much credit. I'm not talking about cops. We love police officers too, and law enforcement people, but we're talking about the men in blue behind home plate.
Oh, yes.
And they make all kinds of fun of that. 3 blind mice, where's your seeing eye dog? You know?
Yes, sir.
And I've seen some really bad umpires over the years, and I've seen a lot of good umpires. We have a pastor, an independent Baptist pastor, that flies down every year from Vermont and does some of the umpiring at Bernie Carbo's camp.
That's
and
awesome.
We're going to try and get you to that camp. We're trying to get the Fitcus to that camp.
I'd love to go.
At Hank Aaron Stadium. Yeah, just got back from that. Had a wonderful time. We had at least five saved, including the state judge's brother.
Wow.
But Nestor Shylack was a friend of mine, and every year the players in the American League would do a survey with the Sporting News publication as to who's the fairest and most accurate umpire, and Nestor always won in the American League, usually Tom Gorman in the National League. And he's in the Hall of Fame with his father in umpiring, the father of modern umpiring, Cal Hubbard. Got a trivia question for you you can use at the Resurrection holiday season when you're around the ham dinner table. Who is the only man in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown and in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio?
Wow.
Cal Hubbard. He's in there as a football player in Canton, and it's a little bit of a trick question, and an umpire in Cooperstown.
Well, that's neat.
But your brother, right after the holidays, you and I spoke at length on Christmas Eve, not knowing a few days later your brother would be in heaven. And he was regarded as one of the greatest umpires in America today. Tell us about your brother and tell us what happened in the accident, and then tell us about your brother.
Well, what happened was he and his dear wife surprised us on Christmas Eve. They drove 8 hours from actually Canton, Georgia, or Cartersville, Georgia. They drove down and they surprised us Christmas Eve. And my brother Chuck, he comes in. We love to call him Sonny because that was a nickname that stuck with him. But he knocks on our door, opens the door, and he says, "Merry Christmas." And I said, "What in the world?" I said, "That looks like Chuck." That is Chuck Jr.
You weren't expecting him.
I was not expecting him. So he walks in, he said, "Leah forgot the gifts." And he said, because Leah forgot the gifts, we had to drive him down here. So he started passing out gifts to everybody, just like Santa Claus, And he was just so bubbly. My brother, one thing about it, he was loud and proud, and he always. But when he came
typical
in,
umpire,
he was awesome, and he came in. He gave my boys some money. That was the first time in the 5 years that my immediate family had been together, and so we were all in the motorhome. We were rejoicing and laughing, and we were getting pictures taken and everything, just having a great time. And I said, "Have you been in the house to see Mom yet?" We were parked right beside my mom's house. And he said, "No, I haven't." I said, "Let's go in there and surprise her." So we went in there to surprise her. Anyway, we surprised my mom. And so the next day, he went to church with my mom, which Christmas last year happened to be on a Sunday. And so he went with my mom to church. He went to the altar and prayed with his dear wife, wept. And he came back and he hugged my mom and he said, "Mom, I love the Lord." And he said, "I'm going to live for the Lord all my life." That was the last words that she ever heard him say. He drove home, him and his dear wife, and he went to work the next day, worked 2 shifts. He worked at Kroger. He worked 2 full shifts. And he had just got done talking to his wife on the phone, his sweet wife. And he said, "Do you have the Cowboys tape? Is it taping? Do you have it recording?"
He was a real big Cowboys fan, Dallas Cowboy fan.
And Detroit and Cowboys were playing. He said, "Have you got the tape started? Have you got the tape started?" She said, "It's going, it's going." He said, "Okay, when I get home, we're going to watch the game." And he said, "Do we need anything from the store? Milk or anything?" He always did that. And she said, "No, I don't think we need anything." She said, "You can get whatever you want, but we don't need anything." And as soon as, right after that, he was headed home, and he hit a guard. I think what happened was he had a heart attack. He hit a guardrail, and the guardrail pushed him out into the oncoming traffic, and he hit a Lexus head-on, and it killed him instantly. And so that's what I talked to the police officer.
He was pronounced dead at the scene?
Yes. I talked to the police officer that did the accident, and he said, "I feel like he had a heart attack." And he had been in so many different accidents, throughout his life, and lived through all of them. Even worse than this one. But when the Lord's time is for you to go, it's His time.
And that's why it's important to be ready to meet the Lord and make sure you're saved by the blood of Jesus and not religion.
So I was at my mom's house. We were watching Dallas and Detroit, and Dallas was beating Detroit handily, and we were all rejoicing. My younger brother was at the game. He happened to be at the game with 2 other music people, and they were on Facebook.
I'm not going to drop any names, but was one Gerald Wolf?
One was Gerald Wolf, and one was Rodney Griffin and his dad. And so they were FaceTiming, and they would say, when the Cowboys get a touch, "Hey, all right," and they'd send it to us, and we were rejoicing, having a great time. Right after halftime is when I got the phone call that my brother went to heaven. And I was dreading having to call my brother and tell him that
Were you left with that responsibility?
I was left with that responsibility because, and here's the thing, I had been talking to Jim all day long, and we knew he was going to the game, and Chuck said, "I'm jealous." That was the last text that he texted Jim. "I'm jealous," and he said, "I want to be at the game too." And we had all planned on going to see Dallas and Green Bay the next year. That all of us were going to go
together.
Yes, together.
How old was your brother?
He was 58. I believe he was 58, but what a testimony. We'll get into that in a minute, but what a tremendous testimony he was for the cause of Christ, and just a great brother. I traveled with my family and sing.
Right.
Becky traveled with her family. They were in deputation going to Canada. He always called us, and he knew where we were. He knew what we were doing, and he said, "I know where you're at." And he said, "I just want to let you know I was praying for you."
And obviously he was, because he kept up.
Those calls.
You're going to miss those calls, aren't you?
Oh, I miss them. I miss them every day. And we'd call each other, and it was our tradition. We'd call each other, "Hey, what's going on?" Whatever, and we'd talk real fast, and we both knew who it was by the time,
Yeah.
And but Chuck was just so much fun. He was bubbly. A bright personality, and I miss him. I bet
you do. Tell us a little bit about the funeral. By the way, our special guest today is Brother Steve Brady of the Brady Family Gospel Group. Tell us about very briefly, because we want to get into your brother's testimony, how he came back to God. But I believe one of the best umpires in Major League Baseball today, Mr. Hudson, Marvin Hudson.
Yes, sir.
Gave part of the eulogy.
Marvin Hudson. What we did is we had his funeral in Florida, because that's where we were all from. But we had a memorial in Georgia, and we had almost, I think it was around 150 umpires that were there.
Wow.
And boy, you talk about a blessing. They were testimony after testimony about how he had put others ahead of himself. He even made up wristbands that said, "Jesus loves umpires," and he was passing those out to everybody.
I'm glad he does, because we ball players don't.
But he was very patient. Chuck was an umpire that was very patient. When a coach would come out, or a team captain would come out and say, "Hey, Blue, what was the call here?" He was very deliberate and very careful, and he was very kind. And he would explain, "Here's what happened, and here's what I saw, and this is why I made this call, and here was my judgment call." And he was very thorough.
We know these umpires that are always throwing people out of ball games. I'm talking about the major leagues now.
Yes.
Nestor told me one time, if the umpire is good and accurate and fair and controls the game, Nestor hardly ever pitched anything. Even Earl Weaver would kick sand in his face, and he wouldn't throw Earl out.
Yes.
And that's what your brother was. That's why Marvin Hudson is. He controlled the game.
Yeah.
Tell us about him coming back to the Lord, because we could talk for 2 hours just about his umpiring skills.
Well, I'll tell you this, my mom.
Now, you're the son of a preacher.
I'm the son of a preacher, and my mom is the most godly lady that I know. She's an angel, and her prayer, and buddy, when she prays, heaven pays attention. Mm-hmm. Her prayer was, "Lord, please don't let Chuck Jr. go to heaven until he's right with you," because he was wayward for a while. And I want to tell you, the Lord honored that prayer, and He answered that prayer. And she was a prayer warrior, but she had prayed, and all through the time, the devil had lied to my brother and told him, "Well, your mom and dad don't love you. Your family don't care about you." And all this time, my mom and dad are traveling, and I'm with them, and we're traveling, and we're saying, "Pray for my older brother." And he's saying, "Pray for my oldest son," because he's wayward. And so when he came back to the Lord, he went to some of these churches, and they said, "You're the one we were praying for." He said, "Praying for me?" And they said, "Yes, your mom and dad requested prayer for you. They love you so much."
How about
and the
that?
devil had lied to him and told him that my mom and dad didn't love him, which was a total lie. And the devil's a liar.
We had a preacher preach from Missouri around Thanksgiving. He preached a sermon on deception, how all those years the father, Jacob, had believed that Joseph was killed in the hole.
Yes, sir.
And he was alive.
And he grieved.
Yes, and he grieved.
Yes.
But he was deceived, and the devil dupes so many people.
I tell you, the devil is just, and you know what? The devil does his job. And we as Christians sometimes are deceived and duped into, the devil's lie. And my brother for a long time was wayward. And one of the reasons why he was wayward is because he felt like he was not good for anything. And he had so much potential. The guy was brilliant. He was in the Marine Corps. And after the Marine Corps, he got out and he started pursuing the umpiring, and he was awesome. He was not very tall, And because of his height, I believe that's why he was so feisty. And he would let you know right out. Right, I mean, he was always in charge, but he was kind about it. And he'd say, "Okay, Coach, I've already talked to you. Now go back in the dugout. I've already explained to you. Go back in the dugout." He was in charge, but he was very good, and he was good with young people. A guy would come up to bat, and he'd say, "Was that a strike, Blue?" And he'd say, "Yeah, that was a strike." And he'd say, "Where was it?" He'd say, "It was about chest high." And my brother had a good strike zone, and I've watched several recordings of him. He did a big game out in San Diego for all Stars, and this we're talking about college. We're talking about high school and college, and my little brother Jim was able to fly to San Diego to watch him umpire that game.
How about that?
He umped Roger Clement's son, and he umped some other big guy's son, and it was great. But we loved it, and Chuck was a great witness for the Lord. This guy, Marvin Hudson, that I was telling you about, the World Series umpire, he had several conversations with Chuck, and he said every time we talk about certain games, big games that were going on, and he said it always came back around to the Lord. And I said, "Man, that's awesome." And he did a great job at my brother's memorial. It was great.
I bet he did.
It was in Georgia at a good-sized church, and all these umpires were there, and several of them came up to me and said, "We would not be umpiring right now if it wasn't for Chuck."
He was a true mentor.
He was, and they said we went to the school, and the second day we were getting all this information, and we had no idea what we were doing. And he said, pretty soon I felt the arm go around me, and he said, "It was your brother Chuck." And he said, "Hey, don't get discouraged. You're not going to get all this in one day. Just take a deep breath, just inhale it, and just and think about it." And he said, "I was getting ready to walk out and leave. I was never coming back. But he said, your brother put his arm around me and said, just take it all in. You can't get it all in one day." And he said, "Now I'm an umpire."
Isn't that amazing? So he not only affected people for Christ, but he affected umpires and vice versa.
Yes.
He used to be a short little Mexican pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, and he spoke very little English. We got him from the Blue Jays, and he would say, "I don't like the umpires in this game. They're vampires. The umpires are vampires." I never forgot the umpires are vampires. But
that's great.
We're talking with this wonderful friend, Steve Brady, of the Brady Family Gospel Group. We're going to be talking in the next episode how his brother just left recently to start his own trio.
Yes.
He was up for a Grammy Award. This family goes back kind of like the Carter family, a whole long ago in gospel music. Kind of runs in your DNA. If your brother were here, a two-part question, because we got about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
If your brother were here, what would you tell him today, since he's been in heaven? And in a sense, he is kind of here. I don't believe that we communicate with the dead, but
right.
in a sense. And if not, the Holy Spirit can take him this message. I do believe that. But if your brother were here physically in this TV studio, what would you tell him since he's left? And then, very quickly, what would you share with our viewers? If you could give them one principle that your brother lived by that you would like to share with our televised audience, what would those two things be?
Well, the first thing is, I spoke for your prayer breakfast, and I was honored to do so on Saturday.
Did a great job.
And here's the verse that I used, "And he being dead yet speaketh." I don't believe that Chuck knew the influence he was on so many people. And he remembered names. He was personable. This one guy said, he remembered my name. He said, I couldn't remember his name, but he remembered my name. And he was very personable and very, very friendly and very outgoing. And I think the thing that I could leave with folks is you don't know the impact that you are to people. You don't know the influence.
So true.
My dad used to tell me this: no matter who you are or where you are, you're an influence on somebody. And you may not be influencing some great hero, but you're influencing somebody. People are watching you.
Yeah.
And don't forget that. Those little wristbands that he made up, "Jesus loves umpires," that seemed like a small thing. That was huge to people, umpires. They loved it. And they'd wear, I'd look, and they'd do their out sign, and they'd have that little "Jesus love umpire." and I'm telling you, he had a big impact on people, and he don't even know the impact.
That's what you would tell him today, brother. You had an impact on hundreds and hundreds of people. That
He was humble. He was very humble, just like my dad, very humble. And he didn't know the impact he had on people.
Wow. We've been honoring Charles Brady Jr. That's his brother who went to be with the Lord recently. And what a testimony for the Lord. Kind of a prodigal, came back to God,
Yes.
and loved Jesus and loved people to Christ, and ministered and influenced people through his umpiring, which was really a quasi-ministry.
Yes.
It's been great to have Brother Steve Brady on. We're going to have him back on next week. And we're going to have his wife back on. They're going to talk about their ministry of music, the Brady family. And it's been great having you today. And I'm sorry your Rangers didn't pull it out. We went to the home opener. I was rooting for the Indians. He was getting in my face about it.
Go Rangers!
Security guards almost carried him out, to be quite frank about it.
Hey, I will say this.
I said, don't get too arrogant. The game's not over.
Hey.
They were up by 4 runs. We came back and beat
I
the
will
Rangers.
say this, it took him extra innings for his Cleveland Indians to come back against the Rangers. Extra innings.
And we're not too carnal here. No, we're not carnal at all. Good to have you on Just to Chat with Pastor Bruce Engelman. I want to thank the crew, Brother Todd Fitka Jr., our floor director and producer, Todd Fitka Sr., our assistant executive producer, and all the camera crew. It's been great to have you. Don't miss the next show of A Chat with Bruce Engelman, because we'll be having him back and his wife with us.
God bless
For
you.
another episode, remember this: Jesus loves you.
Yes.
And he'll never forget you.
Dave.